October was such an interesting reading month. Many ups, some downs, but let's get right into it. Hola mi gente, MsMalcolmHughes here. Welcome back. I am coming to tell you all about the books that I read in October, which ones I enjoyed, which ones I didn't. But before we do that, let's talk about the fact that my shelves are here. I've started building them. We have this first half shelf here, so soon the background will change. I'm excited. Not excited about building these shelves though, but that's not why y'all are here. So let's get into the books. All right, so our first book that we're going to discuss is The Secret World of Maggie Gray by Granger, and this is the first book in the Drew Collins series. Fun fact, Granger is actually the last name of Desiree, who has written a lot of other books. So this is the first book in this genre, but not a first-time writer. What this book is about is we actually have a young woman who it turns out is magical. And she's already in college, so that'll matter later. But she's in college. It turns out that she has some like magical historical lineage. And because of that, she should go to Drew Collins University. And her professor recommends it. She doesn't know that it's like a ploy or a setup, but this is the fun part where she's now going to this magical university and we get to go with her on that journey. It turns out that she, as you all can see on the cover photo, is in a very dark and twisted way a descendant of some vampires, but she's at the school where there are all type of magical beings and she ends up befriending some others that are really like, it's a really fun journey for us. But we're trying to figure out what's going on. She's trying to figure out who she's related to, what the story is there, and just why exactly why she's at this school, why it's symbolic, what she is, and why everyone interacts with her the way she does. And on that journey, we get to meet vampires and nymphs and sirens and so many other beings. It was a really fun journey. That's what I loved about this book. It's obviously, she says it herself, influenced by Harry Potter, but the fact that we're at a university and not a high school means we get to explore so many different elements. So you get romance, you get erotica, you get so many different things in this book. I actually really ended up enjoying it. One thing I will say is you kind of have to get past the first chapter. And I say that because this is her first time in this genre, and I don't know if that's why, but the first chapter where we go in the past and we're getting a little backstory on our main character is a little choppy. It doesn't flow seamlessly, but once we get past there and we get to the university, the story makes a lot more sense. And even that first part, the backstory makes more sense. I just wish that it was a more seamless transition in the telling, because I was just like, wait, what? But that's the only real flaw I have with it. You could tell Desiree has been writing. I enjoyed it. Definitely will be reading part 2. I also love the characters. Namir's a new book, boo. So I was like, I'm having my notes. I said, love a brolic wolf. So side note, I always thought Bella was with the wrong person. She should have been with Jacob. But neither here nor there. So much going on here that I really enjoyed. The ending was good. I did dislike the fact, and you don't have to read this, so it could just be me, the author's notes at the end. It gave something away that I was uncertain about, that I would have found out in the second book, but I walked away from this book knowing it and kind of wish that I didn't. But if you don't do that, you won't have that problem. And I don't know, some people don't read the notes and things at the end, but I do. So this is actually supposed to be a murder mystery. That is how it's categorized. I don't know if I got that. Initially, but it was a really good like fantasy paranormal read, and I highly recommend it. Based on my scale of read now, read soon, read when you have time, or read if you want, I ended up giving this a read soon. Definitely has a lot of potential. If book 2 does what it needs to, it might be higher, but read soon is actually really high and really good as well. The next book I have is My Darkest Prayer by S.A. Cosby. This is my first reading of an S.A. Cosby book, and this story is about, we have Nathan in rural Virginia where he deals with the bodies. He actually works at a funeral home, and so he quite literally works with the bodies, but in his free time as a former Marine, and also someone who used to be a sheriff's deputy. He has now transitioned to helping folks in the community or dealing with things unofficially if he needs to. And that's how he gets pulled into his current situation where a pastor who has a sketchy past has seemingly committed suicide, but all evidence is pointing to murder. And so he's been petitioned by some members of his congregation to figure out what has happened to the pastor. And then we go on this long journey from there. This book is a thriller. It had you on your seat, want to know what's going to happen. I will say, S.A. Cosby does an introduction because this is a anniversary edition, and he opens it with, "Let me tell you a story." And goodness gracious, that just pulled me in. It felt immediately raw and vulnerable in what he was telling about this story and how there may be flaws and things like that because he's obviously grown as a writer. I really appreciated that. Getting into the story, I liked the pacing. And Nathan was so interesting. The character didn't evolve as much as I would have liked. However, for the story, it makes sense why he wouldn't have. He was on a mission and it required maybe not the healthiest parts of himself to be at the forefront. I will say that the writing here flows. There are some very philosophical aspects that really cause you to stop and ponder. So I really enjoyed that. We'll be reading every book that S.A. Cosby has written because I enjoyed it. Also, I would say though, some of the descriptions of women are very desire driven, and I was like, we get it. So that was a little bit of a con for me, but it didn't take away from the book. I would say that the characters and situations were honest and convincing, and we were always rooting for how is Nathan going to get himself out of this precarious situation now? And so even all the way till the end, there was never a point where I was like, that doesn't seem realistic. It seemed realistic for better or for worse. And overall, I really enjoyed this. Like I said, I will be reading every work that S.A. Cosby has written. I like to start with the first work of writers because I like to see the evolution and the growth. And with that, I also ended up giving this a read soon. Next up, we have Porter Archives 1 by Nina. So this is a series of the blogs that she had posted. So not a part of the official canon, but additional context that you can have and know. I actually really ended up enjoying this. I liked learning more about what was happening with the brothers. We actually got a lot more of Daly and his family here. I'm currently reading Clearwater, so this is a great setup for that. I feel like I'm more invested in the story than I would be if I didn't have this introduction that I got from here, because honestly, I'm not that invested in Daly, but getting to know him more makes me more open to it. I thought these were well done. Obviously, they're blogs, so they're kind of all over the place in as far as the different stories, but they all are within that universe. They make sense. I enjoyed them. The pacing was good. The stories were captivating. I learning more about Dr. Pye and watching her help these family members try to get to healthy places. I like that we got to see Sav graduate. So if that's your favorite character, we have this here. I was rooting for him. Yeah, man. He also went to my alma mater. So that's always fun to see how his graduation played out. Wouldn't have happened that way, but I enjoyed it. Overall, this was a really great addition to the text, the core canon text. I ended up giving this a read when you have time, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I think that you can continue and enjoy the series without reading these, but definitely still worth the read. A book that I didn't have planned, but I was kind of caught up in spooky season, so I read it, is Hall of Dreams by Antoinette Sherell. And this is fun. This is given dark vampire tale. We have our main character who is at a point where she's kind of living her best life. She's just dating. Nothing is really enticing her. She's kicking it, but she is not really pressed. No one is captivating her. And so she's taking her time and figuring out life. She gets stopped by an older woman as she's going to her car, and she receives an invitation to this super exclusive party. And so she's like, why not? Why not? I'll go. And so eventually she goes to this party, and listen, little does she know that the reason she's receiving this invitation is because this vampire is obsessed with her. And before she goes to the party, she receives this fortune telling where it's like, oh, your life is going to change if you decide to do this and go down this path. But she does. So she goes to the party, and yes, her life changes. She meets this super intense and interesting vampire. And he is accustomed to having these humans for like one night out of the year. They have this party. He basically glamours them to the point where they don't really remember what happens the next day, but it's not really working with her. And he's like, what is she? So it turns out she's also magical as well. Super interesting, super fun, super intense. I ended up being like, okay, I didn't know what to expect with this, but it was fun. It was fun. Even in the spooky season, it gave you the magical parts that you needed. It gave you a little bit of intensity and darkness without it being too much, and I really appreciated that. So I ended up giving this a read when you have time. It didn't blow me away, but it was good enough that I actually planned on reading part 2. All right, so another book that I read this month is actually Waking the Dead by Yvette, which is a series of short stories that deal with like horror. And this one was interesting. Every story was different. We got to deal with so many different facets of like, but they all kind of centered with water. There was a running theme of water throughout. And the writing was pretty solid. I actually enjoyed them. Some of them, none of them were like super creepy, but some of them had to do with like disturbing elements. You're like, huh, I don't know if that's where I saw that going. Overall, I appreciated the writing. I enjoyed it. I liked the variety. For a lot of the stories, I was a little frustrated that I didn't like the endings. The endings would kind of feel lackluster when the writing had captivated me the entire time. I wanted to know where the story was going. I wanted to know what would happen with our characters. I was just invested with each story, like, oh, where's the journey going now? And I didn't always feel like the ending was rewarding. One story I did really enjoy was called Boss X. And this one was interesting in the sense that we had a guy who goes to the mall. At this point in time, there's like VR headsets. So he's going to buy these microchips of like exclusive films. And there's someone who's following him and is trying to sell him something exclusive. He's thinking it's like X-rated content. He's like, I'm not interested. He's like, that's more appropriate for like high school kids and stuff like that. And the guy's like, I promise you, once you see what I have, you will be interested, you will come back, and you will want more. And what it ended up being is memories that were lost to him because he's about to get married and it's showing him all of these past relationships. And so he ends up becoming obsessed, and it ends up going on this whole whirlwind and journey of its own of what it'll be and what it means for him and his future. So I thought that was one of the better stories. I also really loved the last story. For me, that was the most cohesive story, where from start to finish, the ending made sense. And that one was The Dreamer, where we have a guy whose parents were on S, which is a drug. And so he's born with the power to touch others and have them dream, or to be in a space and touch one person, they all hold hands, and he can give them visions and dreams. And the way that all came together, I like the way it connected to the first story, so I like that that was a thread throughout. But this is the only one from the start of the story to the end of the story. It made sense, and I felt satisfied. Overall, interesting, definitely an interesting, different approach. Learning about different cultures. Most of the stories take place in the Philippines. I also like the story where there's one about a young woman connecting with her dad from beyond the grave. So definitely some interesting topics. Overall, I ended up giving this a read when you have time. It didn't blow me away, but I didn't not want to finish, and I thought it was pretty good. Next up, we have Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. I read this one because I wanted to watch the movie on Netflix, which I did. And this is a story about a young woman named Tally who is born into a society that at a certain age, everyone receives surgery to become pretty. And she is on track with that. She's never wanted anything more. She's like, yes, I cannot wait until my birthday, and then I can get the surgery and become pretty and join her best friend who has already become pretty. However, she meets someone who opens her eyes to maybe you don't have to become pretty. Maybe there's another way. And that leads her on a whirlwind of a journey where she ends up going to an alternate society where no one receives the surgery. It's where you run away and escape to the smoke. From there on, they're trying to think through, what does the future mean? They're going it eventually gets to the place where they have to like liberate others and figure out what the future may hold. It's a lot because Tally is actually sent there on a co-op mission, and the opposite of what she's trying to do actually happens. So then that just leads her on this trajectory that she hadn't planned for. But what I found interesting about this book is that it's actually been pushed as like before the Hunger Games, you had Uglies. And not quite. I see it. I see the dystopian aspects. I like the commentary on society and our obsession with looks and everyone being the same way, especially with the culture that we live in currently. I do think it feels a little outdated. It feels a little too spot on the nose now, but it was written a while ago, so it made sense for the time. I wasn't blown away by the story. I think if we're talking dystopian, and I actually love dystopian novels. So one of my favorite genres for sure. I think it was okay. I think some hints and issues were just too on the nose, too in your face. I did like the twist where it turns out like in addition to just becoming pretty, this is actually what they're doing to you. I don't know if I cared or was invested enough to continue the series, so there's something in that. But I think that if you're a fan of dystopian novels, you may really like it. I ended up thinking that the book and the movie were both okay. I actually thought they did a pretty good job with the movie, all things considered. And so I ended up giving this a read when you have time. Like I said, not a bad read, but not something I loved. There were some other books I had planned to read in October that I have started and not finished. So in addition to the books I have in November, those are always up and an option for me to finish at any time and add them. But that's what I had for October. Those are my thoughts. Pretty good month. I didn't have any read nows, which surprised me, but overall still pretty solid. Didn't DNF a book, so that's a good month in my book. That is it for me. I hope you all are well, all things considered. I hope you all are well. As always, I am MsMalcolmHughes, one who believes that books are sometimes better than people. And until the next one, please remember to give time, to be kind to each other, and to have the very best day of your life on purpose. Peace, o double, adios, ciao.